What you're about to hear isn't just bureaucratic back and forth. It's a stark admission of what happens when federal law meets local defiance. Because this isn't merely about immigration policy. This is about whether a government can enforce its own laws without being forced into danger, chaos, and intimidation. And listen closely, not just to what they say, but to what they won't say. The gaps matter, the evasions matter, and what they reveal next shows you why.
Congressman Emmer and the representative from Minnesota State Legislature versus the Attorney General and fellow in charge of prisons in terms of the level that Minnesota was cooperating with ICE and with Customs and Border Patrol. Were you listening to that opening panel?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So I'll start with you, Commissioner Scott. What would you agree or disagree with in terms of what was said in that first panel in terms of the cooperation or lack of cooperation? Because according to Attorney General Ellison, said they were perfectly cooperating and there shouldn't have been any problems here. And I think that the statement he uses, it was because of the unprecedented nature. Let me get the. Yeah, just said again. It was because of the scale of the surge that's what caused all the problem versus Minnesota cooperating or not cooperating.
Yeah, that's not accurate at all. I actually met with the Attorney General when I went up with Tom Homan. We initially had conversations. The reason that CBP surged a bunch of resources into Minneapolis is because ICE couldn't go do arrests without being violently assaulted, and they were not getting support from state and local law enforcement.
So talk about the kind of arrests, because we heard from here, and I, quite honestly, I didn't get the complete answer from the fellow from the prisons when he said, as long as there's a judicial order. And I was wondering, does he mean from an Article 3 judge, or is he talking about the administrative law judges that we use for enforcement of ICE? So was that a distinction? Were they only going to honor and they only going to cooperate with Article 3 judicial orders? Or did they concede the fact that we handle federal immigration law through the administrative law judges?
So I would defer to ICE on what the normal processes were.
Mr. Lyons.
Yes, sir. I can speak to that. It's both, sir, judicial and administrative. They did not cooperate at all. I can give you an example.
Well, please give me multiple examples.
I can give you an example where ICE, enforcement removal operations and Homeland Security investigations, we did execute a criminal warrant for an individual from Ecuador who fled the state of Connecticut that was wanted for the state of Connecticut for a rape of a 14-year-old minor. He did have a murder warrant from Ecuador, and we did not have any cooperation with that. Going back to the surge part, we did have that.
Just describe no cooperation. I mean, so
we had to
walk through here. So you got this warrant on somebody who's, convicted of, or I guess convicted of a violent crime, or just wanted on a violent crime. I mean, be specific. Talk about this instance.
This incident, sir, the subject was wanted from the state of Connecticut, fled the state of Connecticut after a detainer was not honored in the state of Connecticut. He was wanted for rape of a 14-year-old minor.
But he wasn't convicted. They made a big deal about, it's got to be a convicted criminal.
No, sir. It was an actual criminal warrant from the state of Connecticut. And that subject was also wanted on an Interpol warrant because he was wanted for homicide in his home country. And he was also illegal reentry, 8 U.S.C. 1326. So it was
but you understand the point. Again, they were making a big point. It has to be convicted. A.G. Ellison kept saying, well, is the person convicted of the crime?
Well, sir, I think we have to start first. Is the person even supposed to be in the country in the first place?
I understand. but so I'm just trying to point out, is that a valid criteria? The Attorney General Ellison was talking about, well, if as long as this person's been convicted of a crime, that's not required, is it?
No, sir.
The person's here illegally. There's a warrant from a different country as well as from state of Connecticut. So with this individual, what did Minnesota not do? What was requested in Minnesota or Hennepin County or whichever?
So the Minneapolis Police Department and the St. Paul Police Department, they're by city orders, they don't cooperate with us. So for instance, we asked them to hold a perimeter or hold a street. That's why we need more offset agents. We would have to go ahead and hold down that city block. Unfortunately, obviously, those vehicles do stick out. Obviously, we used, based on the subject's criminal history, we used an armored vehicle. Once that's seen Agitators started coming to the scene. So now while we're trying to effectuate a criminal arrest warrant in an apartment building, small stairwell, fatal funnel, we have to go ahead and hold down the outer perimeter, where if we had the cooperation of a state or local agency to work with us on that fact, we wouldn't have to have that many officers.
Why weren't the state and local officials interested in arresting this individual with the multiple warrants on them? Just because it was an illegal immigrant?
Because it involved an ICE operation, sir.
So any other, if it's an American citizens with that kind of warrant from Connecticut, local police would have been doing this job themselves?
I can't speak for him, but I would assume so, sir. I was a civilian police. I was a cop before ICE, and that's what we did.
So talk about the violence, the threats, the doxing against ICE officers. Because again, that's where I've got a great deal of sympathy for people trying to enforce the law. They've been shot at. They've had their vehicles rammed, rocks thrown at their vehicles, doxed. On Central America, I found out that if you're become a new police chief, you get a DVD from the friendly drug cartels with your children and wife going into school and going to church. It's an explicit threat, hands off, or we're going to do something. Well, there's such a demand for unmasking ICE officers, but they've been doxxed. So just talk about the violence, the threats, the doxing that your law enforcement officers are really under.
So, sir, it's day to day. I was the field office director for the state of New England. I covered all of New England. And if you looked at the beginning of the operations, January 20th up until April, ICE officers and agents weren't masked. But it's bad. And I'll just use myself as an example. The week that Charlie Kirk was assassinated, there was a tweet that went out. It said, kill Charlie Kirk, kill another, there was another individual in that, kill Todd Lyons. That's the stuff that ICE, yesterday after the testimony on Tuesday, I went back to numerous death threats against my family. There was a videotape of my wife walking to work that people actively post. The cartels have actually posted the schematics to my home. ICE agents feel that every day. We actually did an operation with the Secret Service where we identified doxers who put up on telephone poles the home addresses and the schools where ICE officers and agents went to. But yet no one covered that operation. We covered that as a success. And I don't want my officers masked. I would work with this committee and any committee to work with holding individuals accountable that dox ICE agents, because ICE agents don't want to be masked.
Now let's confront the reality head on. Notice the word they keep circling around, cooperation. One side claims it's happening, the other says it isn't at all. And that difference isn't academic. It changes everything. Because if a state tells the public, we cooperate, while federal officials say, we can't safely do arrests, you're not watching a policy dispute. You're watching a credibility crisis. Nobody wants to define the standard. What counts as cooperation? Talking points or real operational support? They describe asking for the simplest assistance. Hold a street, secure a perimeter, manage a scene. And the answer, according to this testimony, is no. But this isn't just they said no. It's why they said no. The implication is brutal. The refusal wasn't based on danger, legal limits, or uncertainty. They're claiming it was because it was an ICE operation. Think about what that means. If a violent suspect is wanted on serious warrants and local authorities refuse to help because the wrong badge is involved, what are they protecting? Public safety or political optics? Then comes the chain reaction. No local support means more federal agents, a bigger footprint, more attention, and more agitators showing up. Routine enforcement becomes a public spectacle, sometimes a confrontation. That's not an accident, that's a design. Because when you make enforcement louder and more dangerous, you don't just slow it down, you discourage it. And then the part almost everyone avoids, doxing and threats. This isn't peaceful protest. This isn't accountability. This is intimidation aimed at families, a spouse being followed and posted, addresses in schools blasted online, threats escalating after testimony. So here's the question the mainstream won't ask. Where are the moral lines? And the follow-up they avoid even harder. Who benefits when enforcement becomes impossible? Because this isn't about liking ICE or disliking ICE. It's about whether the rule of law applies when it's politically inconvenient. And notice what's not said out loud. Some jurisdictions have built a sanctuary not just from deportation, but from consequences, by creating a reality where federal enforcement is isolated, exposed, and targeted. And then the mask debate shows up, because it's easy to sensationalize. But listen to what the witness says. I don't want my officers masked. That's not a thirst for secrecy. It's an admission that masking is a response to a culture that treats identification as a weapon. So here's the moral framing. Plainly, if you normalize targeting law enforcement families, you don't get a freer society. You get a more lawless one. And this is why it matters beyond Minnesota. Because once America becomes a patchwork where enforcement depends on your city, once officials can obstruct while claiming cooperation, that's not local control. That's soft nullification. And then the law stops being a standard. It becomes a suggestion. If you want more breakdowns like this, clips, timestamps, and the parts the media skips, hit like, subscribe, and share. And in the comments, answer this honestly. Should any state or city be able to nullify federal law through non-cooperation while pretending they're helping?